2023 is a year that will go down in the history of American comic books, really the year where nobody could ignore what's actually happening with the comic book industry anymore. Even the most strident shills, the most ardent supporters of everything Marvel and DC have been doing for the past decade or so, are actually having to admit, yeah, this doesn't look good. This doesn't look right. Wait, we're having enormous shops go out of business. We're having historic shops go out of business. We're having shops that have won Eisners just go out of business all of a sudden, and it seems to be picking up pace, and a lot of comic book retailers are crying out for help, specifically to Marvel and DC Comics, and echoing a lot of the things that we've been talking about here on the channel for the last 5 or 6 years. One of those is Phil Boyle, the owner of Coliseum of Comics. In fact, he wrote a guest commentary piece on Bounding into Comics that I thought was really interesting, and he was actually willing to do something I really haven't done. He put an expiration date on the American comic book industry if Marvel and DC do not take immediate action to actually fix a lot of things that they've broken over the last decade or so. If you don't know who Phil Boyle is, like I said, he owns Coliseum of Comics, which are several shops in the Florida area. And there are a lot of retailers out there that are outspoken. The one that really jumps to mind is Brian Hibbs, who's always crying wolf so much. You have to take everything he says with like a grain of salt. Phil Boyle is outspoken, but he doesn't actually talk a lot. But when he does speak, always listen, because I notice that he likes to speak the truth. He doesn't really get out of line. He doesn't sit there and claim something is destroying, where maybe it's just a problem with him that's not affecting everybody else. So when he actually goes out there and says, hey, this is what's happening, I personally always pay attention. And I highly suggest you go out there and read the entire article, because I'm not going to cover everything in there. But what I thought were the most newsworthy items, and the first thing is the expiration date that he is putting on comic books. Marvel and DC have strip mined the comic industry for the better part of a decade, putting no money into the market that sustained them for years. An investment is needed by those who lived off the equity for years. If you want to market in 2 years, yes, 2 years tops, then the time to invest is now. He then has a series of suggestions that Marvel and DC should take to heart if they want to start cleaning up their enormous mess. But obviously, the big headliner there is Phil Boyle of Coliseum of Comics putting an end date for the direct market kind of as we know it. 2 years tops, if Marvel and DC do not take immediate action to finally clean up the comic book industry itself. For years now, people have asked me directly, Wes, if Marvel and DC don't do anything and things continue to go in a bad direction, you know, how long does the direct market really have to survive? And I never really have an answer, and I don't really want to take a guess, because a lot of times if I guesstimate things, people will take it like it's gospel and print it like, hey, Wes said, you know, the comic book industry is dead in a year and a half unless this changes. And I don't have anything that definitive, but Phil Boyle saying 2 years tops is very, very startling to me. I'm surprised it's that soon. I would have expected 5 years. If we don't start changing things and they get worse, you know, in 5 years there's a point of no return. To say in 2 years is a point of no return, I find that very distressing. Marvel and DC should be doing something. It's very distressing once you hear these people start to cry out, because it's normally not like this. A lot of these people have learned to live paycheck to paycheck. They've learned to live on pretty low incomes, as the industry has not been doing all that well, you know, for about a decade now. And for them to finally say, you know what, I really can't tighten the belt anymore. We really can't take any more losses as far as customers. DC and Marvel, you have to do something. Do I believe that they'll heed the call? Absolutely not. I've been calling for DC and Marvel to do something for 6 years now. I believe Perch has been doing the same thing for 6 years. Richard's been doing the same thing for 8 years. I think EVS has been doing it for 7 years. And there are a lot of people that have pointed out the exact mistakes that they're making. And guess what? I wasn't wrong. Perch wasn't wrong. Richard wasn't wrong. EVS wasn't wrong. A lot of these commentators haven't been wrong, because Phil Boyle is pointing out a lot of the same things that are destroying comic books right now. Comics, first and foremost, have always been entertainment. Sure, collectible entertainment, which justifies the cost to entertainment ratio, but along the way, the immediate sale and false bolstering of numbers through variant covers, convoluted events, and incessant reboots left the considerations of the fans behind. Character swapping, gender bending, and changing sexual orientation of beloved characters fell flat with the Wednesday Warriors, who supported the industry for decades. The crowd of new readers the changes were meant to attract didn't translate to a one-to-one swap, leaving a declining customer base. And the crazy thing is, this isn't the first time retailers have said this to Marvel or DC. I'm sure you all remember back at, I think it was New York Comic Con about 3 or 4 years ago, where Marvel had kind of like an open house forum with comic book retailers, and they said the exact same thing. And then they wrote hit pieces on all of them, started saying their names and calling them racist and homophobes and all these other terrible names because it wasn't working then. And guess what's happened over those last 4 years? They've just kind of doubled down. They've just made it faster and faster. And instead of creating new characters for this new audience, they've just abandoned that idea altogether. And they just continue to take established characters and change them, whether it be their sexual orientation, whether it be their gender identity, whether it be even the racial makeup of the character. So where at one time Marvel was going full board in on this, and you had the alternative of DC Comics who were kind of in rebirth at the time, and they went back to the basic, the core elements of the characters. So longtime fans, and even if you weren't a DC guy, maybe you were more of a Marvel guy, you still had an alternative to what Marvel was doing at DC. You were still going to get good versions of Batman, Superman, and a lot of those other amazing characters, even if you weren't going to get the right version that you wanted to read of Captain America or Iron Man or Hulk or all the other characters that they had gender swapped and tried to replace with younger versions of the characters. And I think that was probably enough at the time. But then DC stopped doing that, and then they went and did what Marvel was doing, leaving no alternative for anybody. And if you're a longtime reader that believes in what comic books are as an entertainment venue that illustrates heroic acts that people should aspire to, you don't really get that from Marvel or DC anymore, leaving a lot of these fans, a lot of longtime fans, we're talking decades-long fans, with literally nowhere left to go. Okay, so I can't get Marvel anymore, and I can't get DC now because they've decided to change out all their heroes all at the exact same time, and they've decided they need to do sexuality reveals on 5 or 6 major heroes all at the same time. Maybe I can go to the back market, but there's only so many comic books in the back market. And once everybody goes to the back market, what happens? The prices of back market comic books skyrocket. Remember, we saw that 3 or 4 years ago, where a lot of comic books that would have been maybe 10 or 20 bucks the year before almost became unattainable overnight just because the prices skyrocketed. So then, I'm kind of working on a budget here. I don't want to have to spend $30 on 2 or 3 issues just to finish off my run here. And if I want to continue reading comic books, what I'm looking for is in the back issue market and the prices continue to increase. And eventually you just have people giving up and saying, no more, it's too expensive. The characters that I know and love are basically gone. Even the ones that are still here are being treated very poorly by the writers and the editors on board. And there's nothing left for me here. I still love comic books. I would like to still spend money, but there's literally nothing left for me to do anymore. And they've driven off so many people that retailers are going to be the ones and are the ones right now that are taking it right in the balls, like directly in the Weibos happening to retailers right now. Like I mentioned earlier, Phil Boyle does have some ideas on ways to make things better. I'm not going to go into full details on everything he says on all of them, but there are 2 of them that I thought were really interesting. First up, he said comics should be $3.99. Fewer comics, editors who are editors, limited new characters. I'd ask for a minimum advertised price, but we're not in that world anymore. Discount and shipping. Then he finally says, tell stories without proselytizing. I beat this drum for a decade and more, but here we are chasing away a large portion of our customer base with every new tale as they want entertainment, not a serialized sermon. And that is something that, if you remember correctly, just like 3 or 4 weeks ago, maybe it was 6 weeks ago, they had FlameCon, where they had a panel with all these writers who were working in comic books like Alyssa Wong and Charlie Jane Anders and others. And the one thing that they couldn't stop doing was they were like glowing because they couldn't stop bragging about, I get no pushback on all the crazy things I can't believe they're letting me do because we don't have good editors. We actually have editors out there that have an agenda other than telling the best stories with these heroes. These editors are going out of their way to hire the least competent people possible with the most overt agendas possible and putting them in place to actually fundamentally change who the characters are and hoping that they can never be changed back. And we're seeing this a lot now. It's not fun to read comic books anymore. There's nothing fun about reading Hawkgirl. There's nothing fun about reading White Widow. There's nothing fun about reading Jason Aaron's Punisher. And that's why you have a lot of people like kind of walking away. And I've been reviewing comic books here on the channel, basically since the beginning. And I always concentrate on 3 things. I concentrate on art, I concentrate on the plot, and then I also concentrate on characterizations. I think those are the 3 main things that comic books have to get right to be really, really good. Not shockingly, the characterization has been awful for years. That's one of the things that Phil Boyle highlights that needs to be fixed. The characters are iconic for a reason. The movies never got traction until they leaned into what made the characters decades-long successes. Change is good for story, but inevitability, you need to touch base with what brought them. Gender swaps, sexual orientation changes, and outright changes to who's in the suit are short-term headline grabbers, but without long-term sales, with very few exceptions. And we've seen this over and over and over again, where they break the characters completely apart. And they're like, what do you mean you don't want to read Punisher anymore? I just fixed him for you. I made him not Punisher anymore. You're like, no. Here's the thing, Jason Aaron. Punisher fans actually like Frank Castle. They don't have a problem with him. The only people that had a problem with Frank Castle and Punisher are sitting on Twitter not spending money on comic books, and you're giving people a reason to walk away. Think about the sexuality swap for John Kent and Superman Son of Kal-El. They got worldwide coverage. They were on CNN. They were on Fox. They were on the news in Asia. They were on the news in Europe. They were probably on the news in Africa. Everybody was covering the story that we had the first openly gay, queer, a Superman character, John Kent, even though it actually didn't make sense for the character. And people say, well, no, he just finally grew up. It's like, no, there's actually more John Kent Superman that you didn't read. It fundamentally goes against the character established by Peter J. Tomasi. And even the one that was ruined by Brian Michael Bendis, this actually goes against all that stuff. They got all the headlines in the world. You finally got a gay Superman. You got more Pride covers than you could ever imagine featuring a Superman character. And what happened? It was still canceled in 18 issues. A fucking Superman book, the Superman book, the one that was on all the news outlets, because it's not sustainable. It turns out that's not really what Superman fans were looking for. Look what happened to Tim Drake. How long did that series last? Maybe 8 issues? Look what's happened to Bobby Drake. You actually can't sustain any type of ongoing or even miniseries sales with the character now, because he's been so fundamentally broken by these dumbass writers and editors. And the people that are paying the bill are not Marvel and DC at this moment. It's actually the retailers who have been so hosed over by Marvel and DC who will not listen to them. They will not change the direction that they are going. They need to break every single character that they can. There's something fundamentally wrong about superheroes doing heroic things. There's something fundamentally wrong about the majority of our audience being white men. And we need to chase all of these people off and get the right audience in. Well, guess what? They never showed up, and DC and Marvel ended up screwing over thousands of retail partners in the process. How many people have to speak out? How many businesses have to go under before Jim Lee and CB Cebulski get off their asses and actually realize there's an enormous problem here? In fact, according to Phil Boyle, you've actually got 2 years tops to actually fix this, or there won't be a direct market to save anymore. That's how bad things have gotten in 2023. And I don't see them getting better in 2024. I've already seen some of the solicitations, not exactly exciting stuff. And this all comes back to DC and Marvel. There are no more excuses for all the mistakes that you've made. Too many people are going out of business, and it's time to listen to your retail partners. There's also a link in the video description.